You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
Sabah al-Khair, good morning dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Good morning, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Palestine Remembered during this genocide. 286 days, 287 days. It's getting hard to keep count. In studio today, we're going to have a very special and super guest joining us very soon. She's stuck in a little bit of traffic. But overnight, the International Court of Justice ruled on the legality, quote unquote, or illegality of Israel's occupation. It's rejected all of Israel, US and the Western objections. This was the ICJ's most engaged with case since it begun. Over 50 countries made submissions. The World Court has rejected all of Israel's US and its Western allies. The objections ruled that the Israeli occupation of Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem and all its settlements is entirely unlawful and declares Israel is committing racial segregation / apartheid in the occupied territories. Really importantly for Palestinians like myself who see the Oslo Accords as a capitulation of Palestinian liberation movement, it ruled that the Oslo agreements do not and cannot trump the obligations of international law, which protect the rights of the Palestinian people. And it rules that Israel must evacuate all settlers, dismantle settlements, the wall, provide full reparations to Palestinians and their victims, and allow all Palestinians who were forced out to return. Sadly, this is only in the context of Nakba 1967, doesn't make any notion or speak to the 48 Nakba survivors and their descendants, but they too are protected by these same international laws. And importantly, and this is very important in a context of Australia here, that all states and international organisations must end any aid or assistance to the occupation and must take action to ensure that Israel complies and ends the occupation. Now, our Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, some time ago when she was in opposition and we had the Human Rights Watch report, we had Amnesty's report speaking about apartheid, our Foreign Minister then said that Labor does not agree with the term apartheid. It's not a term that's been found to apply by any international court and is not helpful in progressing the meaningful dialogue and negotiation necessary to achieve a just and enduring peace. Well, Senator Wong, Foreign Minister, an international court has found that. An international court has found that Israel is committing the crime of subjugation, of apartheid, that it is in breach of Article 3 of the International Human Rights Law about segregation and apartheid, and that has now been found to be the case. And so it is an obligation on Australia to act. What does that look like from Australia's perspective? At the very minimum, it includes removing double taxation exemption for settlement products. It includes letting Australian citizens who reside in West Bank settlements know that they are breaching and breaking international law. It includes ensuring that any charity that exists in Australia that is receiving DGR tax deductibility status to collect and raise money to allow for the funding of these settlements, to remove that tax deductibility status, and to hold to account any Israeli Hezbollahist, genocidist, advocate for the settlement project to be held to any count of international law and domestic law. We'll have more on that next week, but my guest has just made it. So we're very, very, very excited to be joined by Dr. Bushra Othman. Bushra is a Melbourne surgeon. She is a fantastic Palestinian woman and an inspiration to so many of us. She's just come back from Gaza, and we're going to take you on Dr. Bushra's journey. Good morning, Bushra.
Good morning.
Bushra, very quickly, tell us a 2-minute version of your Nakba story. How did you end up in Australia?
So both my parents were born in the West Bank in Palestine. My dad from a village near Jerusalem, which is called Qalonia, and that was taken over in 1948. So all of those people in those villages spread out all over the world. My mum is from an area called Silt al-Daher, which is up near Jenin. And both of them, their families in the early 60s migrated out to Kuwait prior to 1967 when the Nakba happened, primarily because their families wanted to be somewhere safer. And then, lo and behold, war followed them decades later. So the Gulf War happened in 1990, and then in February 1992, we migrated out to Australia.
Were you born in Kuwait or here?
Born in Kuwait. So I was about 5 years old when I came.
Because you sound like us.
Yeah.
This is an important
Very
distinction.
Australian.
This is an important distinction when we occupy the spaces we do that is, polite society. The surprise when we sound like us. We look like them, but we sound like us. What was it like growing up Palestinian for you?
I think I was very lucky here in Melbourne. In the eastern suburbs, we had quite a large or a growing and what became a large Palestinian community. So, it was always important for my parents that we didn't forget language, we didn't forget culture, we didn't forget food. And being surrounded by people who looked like you, spoke like you, certainly helped reinforce that. They'd also ensure like every few years we'd go back and visit family because we were the only people from either side, either my mum or my dad's side, that had migrated overseas. Yeah. And so to try to keep that connection.
So do you have a Hawi?
No.
Your mum and dad?
No.
Because it was pre-67.
Yeah.
So you went as Australians, you didn't go as returning Palestinians?
As Australians, yeah. When I travel everywhere now, we're Australian.
You're Australian, yeah. Now, Bushra, Gaza 23 has elevated the advocacy, the expectation, even the personal demands of us Palestinians all over the world to speak up and out. What's your journey been like?
It's funny that you mentioned that because you told me many months ago when I spoke at the first healthcare workers vigil outside the Royal Children's Hospital, you said this situation, let's call it, has taken people like me who might have been certainly Palestinian and aware of the struggles and participated in speaking up maybe in our own way, but it's really sort of pushed us to the forefront of being much more aware that we have a more vital role to speak more actively. I suppose not only as a Palestinian, but even just as a general everyday human, and also then as a surgeon. So to be watching something every day for 9 months straight and feeling like you're helpless being halfway across the world, you're watching women and children and men pull people out of the rubble, dying, a healthcare system that's being overwhelmed, doctors that are being abducted and tortured, and feeling like you can physically do nothing, even though you have certain skills that actually might be quite valuable. I think over time, quickly, it became evident that if I could try and go over there to assist, then that would be one of my aims.
Brilliant. We're going to get there, I promise. Like every Palestinian, just trying to get to their end. This is a safe space. This is, you've done a couple of interviews and you've been fantastic. You can totally relax here. You're not going to get the H question. Tell us a little bit about PANZMA, Palestine Australia New Zealand Medical Association.
Perfect. When we were in Gaza, everyone would always see it on our vests and scrub caps and say PANZMA, and they just think of the soccer player. So sort of a running joke for a bit, because obviously no one had sort of heard of it. It's a group of healthcare workers here across Australia and New Zealand. They're all volunteers. It was founded back in 2020, basically with the aims of trying to unite people, but also providing either education or support programs for Palestinians in Palestine, so in the West Bank and in Gaza. Over the last few years, they've managed to collect us as healthcare workers sort of across Australia and New Zealand. They've run up a bunch of fundraising projects, so they've sent either medical supplies or donations overseas, which has been very helpful. And I think for them in particular, since October of last year, it became evident also that we've got a role to play here in Australia as Palestinian healthcare workers, and that part of our advocacy was also in trying to generate a medical mission or medical missions that could go over there.
Now, PANZMA is an Australian charity, so you can support PANZMA, 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 Palestine, Australia, New Zealand Medical Association. What's the process of getting into Gaza?
People always ask me, how were you able to go over there? Like, did you feel that it was safe? How did you mentally cope? I mean, when you sort of start planning for a medical mission, it took at least 3, 4, if not 5 months or longer that I was aware of for us to be able to physically reach Gaza. But behind the scenes, the volunteers that have worked hard to try and get this mission off the ground have probably been doing it for 6 months. There's a lot of paperwork and administration and hoops to jump through, just like with anything else. And maybe a little bit more so because PANZMA was just starting and it was going to be their first medical mission. So almost all the NGOs that go out there to Gaza are under the umbrella of the WHO, World Health Organization. And prior to the start of May, everyone was entering through the Rafah border crossing. And as we all know, then that got taken over by the Israeli army and it's now been burnt down. So I'm not even sure if physically it exists anymore as a true crossing that can be used. And we were getting close to the point at the end of April or the start of May when we were going to be given an entry date for our medical mission, with maybe about 9 or 10 people initially being allowed to enter. And then that all just sort of got thrown to the wayside when the border crossing got closed. So we didn't know for a couple of weeks what was going to happen. There were teams that were stranded either in Egypt or Jordan waiting to see if they could enter, waiting to see if Israel was going to give WHO permission for medical teams to enter and help, which sounds a bit crazy to reminisce about now. And then slowly it became evident that there was the first medical team that got evacuated through Karam Shalom or Karam Abu Salim, which is normally just a trade route crossing for Israel into Gaza or Gaza into Israel, either way. And then eventually, once that happened, we got sort of the green light that we were going to be able to get an entry date in mid-June, with our numbers for the medical team going in being reduced down to 5. And then in the end, 3 of our team members who all have Palestinian ID had been denied by COGAT, so the Israeli authorities that give permission for people or, give clearance or security clearance, whether someone can go in. And not because they hadn't declared it, but simply because they exist as Palestinians.
It's just Israel being Israel.
Just Israel being Israel. But it's just, it seems ludicrous to think that, you've worked hard at a certain skill or career that is aiming to help and benefit people and provide aid in a place that needs it, and you're being prevented from helping those people. And for these particular individuals, that it's their own people, which was really sort of a big slap in the face.
You're listening to 855 AM.
We're joined by Dr. Bushra Othman, Australian-Palestinian surgeon, woman extraordinaire, icon.
Certainly not an icon.
You're an icon, sis. The situation, what did you see?
It's very strange trying to even now describe to people that it's one thing seeing something on your phone or hearing about it, or even potentially, picking up the phone and speaking to loved ones over there. Like I've sort of gotten a bit more of a taste of what it might feel like if I had family in Gaza and what some of our family friends are going through in terms of seeing on the news their last name when people are massacred or, don't survive an explosion or are taken to the hospital. So it certainly felt much more confronting to physically see it. So the very first thing is you enter Gaza in the UN convoy and you're going down the Salah ad-Din road, that main road. In the first 5 minutes, you see the Gaza airport that was bombed in 2003 or 2004, the remnants of it, which is just, like a few pillars here and there and a whole bunch of rubble. And there's no human life for the first, maybe few kilometres because it's very close to the crossing and it's an unsafe area to be, so you don't really see people, but you're just seeing sacks of flour that's on the ground that have either been dropped or spilt from the aid trucks, and sometimes the wind picks it up and mixes it with the dust, and so the cars get covered in sort of this array of dust and flour, and you think, this is vital aid that someone needed and it's been dropped. You're driving past and literally the amount of destruction, and I know we've seen it on our phones, but it is very, very different to see up close and personal. Just piles and piles, meters high of stone and rubble, and, you know, buildings that have had the walls sort of blown apart, but maybe is still half standing. And, you know, off in the distance, you might see a few buildings that are sort of still as they were, which seems very much like a juxtaposition, you know, like there's a few areas where you'll see some buildings, and if you didn't look around you, you might think you're still in Gaza pre-October 23. And then if you just move a few meters to the right, you'll see what it's sort of all about. I think the other thing that was also very confronting was just, I honestly don't think we can imagine what it's like living in a tent. So, you know, either running out of your house or, you know, leaving your house thinking, the common thing people would say to us was, we didn't ever think that this is what was going to happen this time around. Like, you know, these people have lived through war their whole lives, for some of them ever since they were born, 16, 17 years ago when Gaza was under siege. They don't know any different, but a lot of them, even early on in October or November, left their houses thinking it's going to be a few weeks, like we're going to be able to return. We don't need to take mattresses. We don't need to take all the, you know, whatever you might value in your house. And so they left. They either, like especially people up in the north, came down to the south or went to Khan Yunis or went with family somewhere else in Gaza. And it's been 9 months and they haven't been able to return. Or they've been getting videos and messages from people who did stay saying, your house was bombed, or just anything. Like, it's just gone. Whatever you had is gone. And so I think that even for them, they never imagined that this is what they were going to be put through sort of for 9 months. And so then some of them have been displaced even from tents multiple times. You know, we'd be in the hospitals doing a ward round, so we'd be going and checking on the patients, and you'd say to the patient, look, it's been a few days, like you've recovered from your major abdominal operation. For some reason over there, despite the malnutrition and everything else, for the people who can make a good recovery, they do actually recover quite quickly. And so then there's no room in the hospital. We're at, you know, 600-700 inpatients compared to what should normally be 200 in this hospital, or possibly even more, and then thousands of displaced people living everywhere in the hospital. And the patient would say to us, like, I don't have anywhere to go to. I don't even have a tent to go to. And the doctor or the surgeon or the nurse, whoever would be with us on the ward round, they'd say, we're also living in a tent. Like, you know, the comparison is that everyone exists almost the same. And if you have a house or somewhere with walls and a roof to stay in, you're probably seen as like the upper echelon of society, and it's just by luck that, you know, that particular area hasn't been targeted or forced to evacuate or, you know, been besieged.
I've heard stories of people who still do have 4 walls and a roof.
Yep.
That might have been 4 or 5 people. They're now 20 and 35 people.
Yeah, possibly even more. Sometimes the men might, you know, like they'll put all the women and children sort of within the house, but if it's an apartment building or, you know, like a building that still has a roof, then they might put the men or something like up on the roof to sort of just give them room. But yeah, it's incredible.
Medically, I mean, you went there as a surgeon. I know this is a huge impost, and can't thank you enough for coming, Bushra, and for everything you've done. Maybe just one story, a medical story. I mean, you know, you're here in world-class facilities. Everything's available to you, the machines that go ping and everything.
Yeah.
Gaza, surgery in Gaza.
There's so many stories. And it's hard not to cry when you think about certain situations. Even just simple things like in the very last days, either that last day or the second last day that I was there, you know, there was a lady she was in her 40s. She's got a young family. She's got overactive thyroid. It's been 9 months. She hasn't been able to get her medication. And so her thyroid is now just this, it's like a tangerine, probably the size of a tangerine in her neck. She can't really swallow. She can't eat or drink. She's lost 12 or 15 kilos. It's very difficult to breathe. And she's like, I can't get an operation, because even when she asked me, you know, like there was no sterile gowns, even emergency operations weren't really sort of going ahead. And she can't even access the medications that she would need. And I felt trapped. Like, how can we exist in a place that should normally... And the thing that I'd really like to remind people is, I'm not sure what everyone thought before October, how Gaza existed, but they had El Shifa Hospital, which was probably equivalent or rivaled any other facility that we would have in most of Melbourne. So they were doing complex laparoscopic bowel surgery there. They had, you know, all types of subspecialties. the Shifa Hospital was almost like a golden prize within that community. And when that got besieged for the 37 or that 40 days and then got taken over by the Israeli army, it was really a big hit to that Gaza community, not just medically, even for the people around it. And I think that's when a lot of them knew that this war, quote unquote, was going to be different from beforehand. So I think probably for me, the main story that, or one of the main stories that ever sticks out was a 17-year-old girl called Anwar. And the main reason it sticks out is because I think her parents saw me as being interested, and I was a female surgeon, so I'd sort of follow up with her when she'd already survived an explosion and had multiple injuries, and we came in when she'd already had at least one abdominal operation, but it certainly wasn't common for there to be a female surgeon, and so I think her family saw me on the ward rounds and had decided that I'd expressed enough interest, and they said, please look after her like as an amana, like a trust. Which is hard to talk about because eventually she died from her injuries despite everything we could do. And this is a 17-year-old girl who's got severe burns, massive gluteal wounds, a fracture in her hip with her bone visible and metalware being present. And, she would have gone off to sleep for an operation. I held her hand and looked in her eye, and we couldn't save her despite everything that we could do there. And of course we're limited in what we can do, but the team tried exceptionally hard. And what do you say to those parents? They've given you a trust and you're not able to do anything.
Bushra, there's nothing we can say to those parents or to you to thank you for everything you've done. The question is, what do we say to humanity? What do we say to humanity that allows such a thing to happen, that sits by and accepts that such a thing can happen, to a humanity that has denied our humanity?
And just on that, this is the thing that's probably much more frustrating for me now, that even if I forgot everyone in the community across Australia, every single, any person, even just if I spoke about the healthcare workers, that, we're used to dealing with people who can sometimes be in life and death situations. We're used to feeling understaffed or under-resourced and dealing with all of those pressures. And we can't even extrapolate it to what the healthcare workers are going through over there. We've all read it in the news. And there are plenty of other Australian doctors that have gone over there to Gaza to provide care. And they've all come back, and everyone should have been able to have heard their testimonies and what they witnessed. And as a person who works in healthcare, who has moral and ethical duties to other humans and to be able to help them, no matter who they were, wouldn't matter if someone had come in as a perpetrator from an attack or if they were the victim. Everyone in Australia, if they came into an Australian hospital, you're morally obligated to treat them. And so I can't just actually put two and two together as to how we can see everything that's happening over there and people think that there's any sort of justification or aren't willing to speak up and say that these aren't right. At least to say that hospitals and healthcare workers and facilities that shouldn't be a target should not be a target. Israel is committing war crimes by targeting these specific areas and these specific people. So anyway, that's what I figure must be part of my job, to try to help them understand that a little bit better now that I'm back.
Bushra, thank you so much. How are you coping?
Other than when I cry when I remember some of these stories, I feel very blessed and grateful that I've actually got a very, very great network of family and friends around me. I've had other people reach out sort of in the mental health space and psychologists, offering their support just by having heard my story. I don't know them. I've never met them. They're not even necessarily friends of friends, maybe far removed. And I think for me, I've probably boxed up all the really severe sort of emotional damage that might have occurred from having witnessed and listened to certain things over there, and honestly just used that and transformed it into fueling action and advocacy here. Because what would be worse is just sitting around and lamenting over everything that we witnessed and heard, and what we felt from all the connections that we've made with people over there. I spoke to a friend in the hospital a couple of days ago when some of the massacres had occurred at Nusayrat and some of the UN schools. And for the first time I felt if I had called a family member and said goodbye to them, that night, if they'd managed to have phone reception or internet access, that I did not know whether the next day they were going to be able to text me back and say that they were alive. I finally feel like from all the way back here, I've gotten a taste of what that feeling is like. And I mean, maybe there are certain times or certain points when I feel like maybe the emotions might be a little bit overwhelming, but so far for now, I think I've actually been dealing with it okay.
You're a superstar and a beacon. We can't thank you enough, Bushra. So PANZMA, PANZMA, PANZMA.org is how you can support that organisation and their vital work. We've got a minute left. Are you going to go back?
I wouldn't have left if it was up to me. If I wasn't, I'd say told, but I mean, obviously every mission has to come to an end. But if I keep texting my friends over there, and I said if I had a teleportation device, I'd come back on it yesterday.
That's Dr. Bushra Othman, a wonderful Palestinian, and proof that we would, like every human, contribute if we were just treated as humans. The link will be in the podcast. Make sure you share that. Share our story. Tell your friends. PANZMA.org, PANZMA.org. Share the podcast and get along tomorrow. You're speaking tomorrow at the rally.
Yeah,
Bushra.
if you're not sick of my voice already, hopefully share a few other stories.
Come along to the rally, State Library at 12 o'clock. Thanks for listening. Share the podcast and tell your friends there's never been a better time for a free Palestine.
Stand in solidarity with Palestine this Sunday.
Hi, it's Nasser Mashni from Palestine Remembered, Australia's only dedicated show on Palestine. Join me every Saturday morning at 9:30 and very importantly, get along to our rallies. Sunday, 12 o'clock, State Library. Join us.
We have to mobilise to show our support for Palestine. 12 p.m, State Library, this Sunday.
Rally to demand freedom and justice for Palestine. No war on Gaza.
Free Palestine Melbourne is a 3CR supporter.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast. If you found it valuable, please consider donating or subscribing to support independent community radio. To find out more, go to 3cr.org.au.